The Wings of Floreth, Book 1, The Duke's Son, Part 1, The Child, Chapter 1, The Duke's Daughter. Duke Damothe got up from his ornate chair and walked round to the front of his large oak desk to the map of the Dukedom of Damothe that he kept on the wall opposite. It was a large map taking up most of the wall. It showed, in as much detail as possible, the entirety of the dukedom and much of its immediate surroundings. Damothe sat on the northernmost edge of the peninsula that was the Kingdom of Floreth. It consisted primarily of forest and farmland. At the moment, though, the Duke's focus was drawn near the top of the map, where a large city was depicted. Gulspon, located a mere 5 miles from the Duke's castle, was a major city in the elven nation of Elistrade. The proximity of such a large city was often of major concern to the Duke and to his spy master, Sir Richman. "You're sure?" the Duke questioned uncertainly. "As certain as I can be without going myself," Sir Richman advised. The Duke sighed worriedly. "Your Grace," Sir Richman said, "this isn't the disaster that it might seem to be. I've been in this castle for nearly 50 years now. I served your father when he was Duke. I've seen the elves do this sort of thing before." He pointed to an area of the wall somewhere to the west of the elven city. "As you know, somewhere just over here is the land of the goblins." "You think they're the reason?" suggested the Duke. He followed Sir Richmond's hands, despite there being nothing on the wall to look at. The 1,000 goblin tribes were always fighting amongst themselves. The lands were constantly being renamed, depending on which tribe happened to be in ascendancy. Currently, it was the Yagnok who had been in control ever since the Duke had come of age, but in the 5 years before then, the land had changed its name 7 times. "Elves and goblins are ancient enemies," Sir Richmond said. "They've been at each other's throats long before we even came to this continent. I think it's more than likely that the goblins have done something to trigger this behaviour in the elves." He moved his hand back to Gulspon. "I really think this is why they've decided to pour so many troops into their city." "So you don't think the elves are a threat?" the Duke asked. "I couldn't say definitely they aren't planning to attack," Sir Richmond told him. "But since they also seem to be fortifying the town, it suggests defence rather than attack. Besides, we've been at peace ever since your great-grandfather built this castle. They know we aren't splintered into factions like the goblins, and that our king would retaliate in force if they invaded. The elves also know our soldiers greatly outclass their own." The Duke nodded grimly. "On the other hand, they greatly outnumber us. We'd better keep a close eye on them just in case." "I already have my best men on it," Sir Richmond assured him. "So," the Duke said, "what else is on the agenda?" "The Harpies, your Grace," Sir Richmond remarked. He indicated an area of the map marked as forest between 2 villages, that of Eastfold and Forestholme. A blue line, representing the River Temva, flowed close to the 2 villages. Judging by the map, the river was between the Duke's castle and the Harpies. "Yes," agreed the Duke. "What about the Harpies? Why did they come here?" "I cannot say," Sir Richmond admitted. "Harpies aren't great respecters of territory. At a guess, I'd say they followed the Temva south from the Elflands. They may not even know they've crossed the border into our lands, assuming they would even care." "Could they have come here to spy on us?" the Duke suggested. "I suppose it's possible," Sir Richmond accepted, "but it's highly unlikely. They wouldn't have brought an entire village with them if this was a covert mission. And they would be using some sort of magic to disguise themselves. No, it's more likely that they were beginning to feel cramped up in the mountains and are looking for a new home." Sir Richmond pointed at an area of bare wall way above the map that roughly marked the point where the nearest mountains were. The Duke breathed out heavily and then shook his head. "In the end, whatever their reason for being here, we can't let them stay. Inform Sir Grant to prepare my army to move out first thing in the morning. Let's hope we can drive these creatures off before they harm too many of the local villagers." "Yes, your Grace," Sir Richmond replied. He turned to leave the Duke's study. "Oh, and Barden," the Duke said. He wandered over to the fireplace to warm himself. "Yes, your Grace?" Sir Richmond asked. "If you've seen my daughter, let her know that I'm now available for our evening lesson, would you?" "You're going to go ahead with tonight's lesson, your Grace?" Sir Richmond asked doubtfully. "I am," the Duke responded. "If fate should decree that my life end tomorrow, then I would rather have one final opportunity to see my daughter tonight." "Your Grace," Sir Richmond agreed, and he let himself out. The Duke eyed the area of a map where Sir Richmond had indicated the Harpies had settled. The roads depicted there showed a way across the Temva somewhere between the 2 villages and dangerously close to where the Harpies had settled. Hopefully it was a bridge. The troops would likely make a lot of noise if they had to wade across a ford. If the Harpies got any warning of the approaching ducal army, they could take to the air with their bows and rain down arrows to devastating effect, all while keeping well out of the range of the human archers. Feeling a little in doubt, the Duke began to wonder if there might not be a magical solution. Maybe Manglos would have a way to muffle the sound of the army, at least until combat was joined. Like Sir Richmond, Mangloss had served the Damothe family since before the current Duke was even born. Although he might seem quite spry for his age, Mangloss had to be in his late 70s. The Duke made a mental note that Mangloss was going to need a horse. There was a brief knock on the door of the study. His daughter had arrived for her evening lesson. For maybe half an hour, the Duke felt he could relax and think about things other than tomorrow's impending battle. "Come in," he called. The door opened, and the Duke's daughter stepped into the room and closed the study door behind her. Her name was Jenni. She was 10 years old, red-headed, with her hair in pigtails. The clothing she was wearing would have been more suitable for a young servant boy than for a member of the ruling family of the dukedom. "Good evening, father," she said gaily. "Good evening, Jenni," the Duke echoed. He did his best to hide his displeasure at how she was dressed. Remembering his manners, he quickly moved to pull out his guest chair and indicated that Jenni should sit down. Jenni did as she was bid. The chair was a little on the large side for her. She couldn't quite reach the floor with her feet while keeping her back supported by the backrest. Also, in part because of the size of the chair and in part because of the material the chair was cushioned with, she had a tendency to slide gradually forward. The Duke moved round his desk to his own chair. Once he had sat down, he leaned forward and rested his elbows lightly on the surface of the desk. "I've been speaking with Sir Grant. He tells me he's very impressed with your weapons training. He tells me that you've developed great skill with the sword and that you are a match for any of the boys of your age. He also tells me that you can even beat some opponents that are as much as 2 years your senior." "Yes, father," Jenni said demurely. The Duke nodded. "It's that Anita, isn't it? She's a bad influence on you. I should ban you from seeing her." "But father, she's my best friend," Jenni protested. "I could talk to Sir Grant, but I can't tell him how he should bring up his daughter, especially after what happened to his wife. You, on the other hand, are my responsibility. I mean, why can't you find some more ladylike hobbies?" She looked at him straight in the eye. "Father, you have told me many times that if the elves should invade our land, they aren't going to spare me just because I'm a girl." "You're right," the Duke replied. "I just hate to see you practicing with the sword when all the other ladies of the court are preening," she finished for him. "Well, yes, I suppose," the Duke replied. "I'm proud of you and of what you can do with a sword. But life isn't all about warfare, and for a young lady such as yourself—" He tailed off. "Well, let's just say there are other things, perhaps more important things, that you should be thinking about." "Are you talking about Prince Goatee?" she asked directly. "Well, yes," the Duke edged. "Prince Goatee, among others. He did spend an awful lot of time with you the last time the King visited. I think he's interested in you." "He's old," Jenni said. "He's 14, the Duke replied simply. "He's younger than either of your brothers. There's not even a full 4 years between the two of you." "But father," Jenni began to protest. "Please, Jenni," the Duke interrupted. "I'm not saying you have to fall in love with him right this minute. Chances are that when the time comes he'll find someone closer to his age anyway. But there are other young men in the kingdom closer to your age, and we don't want to put them off. I don't want you to reach 30 and still not be married. I don't want you to grow up to be an old maid." Jenni's eyes were downcast for a moment, her voice resistant to the words she spoke. "Okay, father, I'll think about it." "Good," the Duke said. Then changing the subject, he said, "So, on to tonight's lesson." "Yes, father," Jenni replied. She shifted her position in the chair, making herself comfortable. For a moment, the Duke stopped to think. What subject could he discuss with her today? It usually felt more like a discussion than a lesson. He felt that she was quite intelligent for her age, and often had insights that hadn't even occurred to the Duke. He smiled to himself. She was so keen to learn too, more keen than either of her brothers had been when they were her age. Just recently, he had discovered that she had been sneaking regular magic lessons with Mangloss. If he ever found out officially, he'd have to disapprove. Magic was something only peasants learnt. As it was, though, he felt proud of her for wanting to push herself. "I think maybe we should talk about Harpies." "Harpies again, father?" Jenni asked, unsure. "We discussed Harpies just 4 nights ago." "Harpies again," the Duke repeated insistently. Jenni nodded. She climbed down off the chair and walked over to the Duke's small but extensive bookcase. It took Jenni only a few seconds to find the right book. It was where she had put it the last time they had discussed the subject. She returned to her chair, and having climbed back on, made herself comfortable. With the book resting gently on her lap, she asked, "What do you want to know?" "Describe them to me," the Duke said. "Their physical features." Jenni gave her father a coy little smile, as if she was party to some secret neither of them were going to share. She didn't move to open the book. It was there merely in case she needed it. Instead, she gave her answer directly from memory. Those who have never seen a harpy before believe they are part bird and part woman. This is in part due to an old bard's tale written some 500 or 600 years ago that is still popular to this day. "Sing it for me," the Duke said teasingly. "Please, father," Jenni replied, embarrassed. "I'd rather not sing. Besides, I'm not sure I can remember all the words." "Another time then," the Duke said with a wink. "So, if they aren't as described in the song, what do they look like?" "Well, They have bat wings rather than feathered wings. They are grey in colour and have arms as well as legs and wings. Their feet are similar to those of a bird, although they have 4 toes in front and 1 behind. She looked up at her father for confirmation. The Duke nodded. Go on. Jenni continued. Their feet are ideal for perching, and it has been claimed that their talons are powerful enough to smash through even the strongest steel armour. Seems unlikely, though, the Duke remarked, considering how weak their legs are. Jenni had heard her father make such a comment many times before. She continued, unfazed. Their hands are equipped with retractable claws. Even unarmed, they are considered quite formidable in combat. Now, I am willing to believe they can punch your armour with their claws, the Duke remarked. What else? Jenni thought for a second and then said, their faces are weird. From the pictures in the book, she indicated the book on her lap, I think that they look a bit dog-faced. Their ears stick straight up like a horse or a cat. They have a very animal-like muzzle, though their noses are the same dull grey as the rest of their body and don't really stand out like they do on a dog. Anything else? The Duke asked. Jenni said. She closed her eyes while she thought. Well, the rest of their bodies actually do look relatively human. Although... She opened her eyes again and looked doubtfully at her father. Have I forgotten something? Look it up, the Duke instructed gently. Jenni nodded, and a moment later she had opened the book and begun to search for the right page. While searching, she came across the following passage. Although, even the females are flat-chested. Jenni paused, looking at the passage blankly for a moment. What does that mean? Nothing to worry about, the Duke replied, suppressing a smile. You'll learn in due course. Jenni sighed unhappily. So what else? The Duke asked. You're still missing something. Jenni replied, a confused look on her face. She glanced helplessly at the book. The Duke pointed with a thumb over his left shoulder. I already mentioned the wings, father, Jenni replied. Lower down, the Duke hinted. Nearer the waist. Near the waist, Jenni repeated, still confused. At the back and near the waist, the Duke clarified. Oh, their tails, Jenni exclaimed joyfully as she finally got the hint. Yes, the Duke exulted. Describe them. A fully grown harpy will have a tail maybe 3 feet in length. They are around half a foot in diameter at the base, tapering to a rounded point. They are not She gave up trying to remember the word and decided instead to check the book again. Once she found the right passage, she read the word out, 1 syllable at a time. Prehensile. Good, the Duke said. What's the tail used for? It's a balance for when the harpy is perched, Jenni replied immediately, closing the book and returning it to her lap. And? The Duke asked. Jenni didn't answer for a second. Instead, she stared into space. Then she glanced at the study door as if hoping it might somehow contain a clue. Finally, she gave up and opened the book again. Oh yes, it can be used like a rudder to help the harpy turn while in flight. What strengths do harpies have? The Duke asked quickly, trying to keep his daughter on her toes. The muscles in their shoulders are shared by their wings and their arms. Although they don't look any more muscle-bound than any human, they're muscular. She struggled for a moment with the word, and then decided to describe it in a slightly different way. Their muscles are more Again she struggled a little, but it wasn't quite so difficult a word. Concentrated than ours. They are between 3 and 6 times stronger in the upper body than the average human. Jenni looked relieved as she finished her sentence. What about their weaknesses? The Duke asked. Harpies have hollow bones. It makes them light enough for their wings to carry them, but it also makes them easier to break. Although they have strong arm muscles, they are creatures of the air, and their legs are made for perching rather than walking. They are maybe half as strong as a human in the lower body. It does seem unlikely that they could penetrate armour with their talons when their legs are so weak. Jenni gave the Duke a cute smile as she reached the end of her description. Describe them in battle, the Duke requested. Harpies can fly, Jenni said. That means sound walls are useless against them. However, they don't like to carry an extra weight when flying. They don't tend to bother with things like armour. They can't armour their wings anyway, because then they wouldn't be able to use them, and that would effectively cripple them. A harpy would also think twice about carrying a heavy weapon, such as a sword. If they are armed with anything other than their claws and talons, it will usually be a ranged weapon, such as a bow or a dart thrower. The Duke nodded sagely. And what about their community? Never knowing when they might need to take to the air, harpies don't tend to wear clothing, even socially. That said, they have been known to wear leather skirts that can be removed in a fraction of a second if they feel the need to save the weight. Harpies prefer to live on the sides of mountains. They like to be high up and she struggled with another word, unget-to-able. They prefer to be near caves, though they don't tend to live totally in the cave, as they also like to be in the sunlight. They might sleep in the cave, but it's more common for them to build huts. How big are they? The Duke asked. Slightly smaller than us, Jenni responded, between 4 and 5 feet tall. I mean their villages, the Duke clarified. Oh, Jenni commented. Each village might contain as many as 300 harpies. Larger villages do occur, but they are very rare. In a village of 300, as many as 200 could be active huntresses. The rest will be children, those who are pregnant, and those who are considered too old to hunt. How intelligent are they? The Duke asked. They have their own community and their own language. They don't have an education system like we do, but it's thought that if they did, they might be of equal ability to us. The Duke thought for a moment while he considered his next question. Then he asked, can they use magic? That's unknown. No harpy has ever been seen wielding magic, but it's thought that there's no reason why they couldn't if someone were to teach them. Okay, what about... Another pause. It had only been 4 days since they'd last discussed harpies, and the Duke was struggling to find something that Jenni might not know. Then a thought struck him. Tell me about their leadership. This was a new question, and Jenni had to refer to the book in order to answer it. Once she found the page, she began to read from it, although she still had to read some words one syllable at a time. For a girl of her age, she had quite an amazing reading voice. Although most people think that the race is purely female, it would be impossible, as a race made purely of one sex would die out within a single generation. Each village contains a male. He is known as the chief of the village, and it is his job to service all the females of the village. She paused. Father? Yes, Jenni, the Duke asked. What does it mean by service? The Duke hesitated. I'll tell you when you get older. Horse and tiger, Father, that's what you always say, Jenni commented with a sigh. Her eyes were downcast again. What else can you tell me about males? The Duke pressed. Once the chief begins to get too old, or sometimes when the chief is unpopular with the rest of the village, a group of females in the village will begin to raise an heir. Sometimes the heir is raised with the full support of the chief, although most of the time they will have to bring him up in secret. Should they get caught, they will likely be killed with the heir. Sometimes leadership of the village can change hands through challenge. An heir that is tired of waiting for the chief to die can challenge for leadership of the village. Likewise, any chief that wants to be chief of 2 villages can challenge the chief of another village for leadership. This is how the larger villages come into being. It is only in these larger villages that sometimes 2 heirs for the chief position are raised, and when they come of age, the village is split again. The Duke raised his hand to indicate she had read enough. What is the life expectancy of a harp? Jenni closed the book and rested it back on her lap. About 30 to 40 years. They reach full adulthood by the age of 8. If they live to be as old as 30, they often begin to show signs of... She slowed down a little. Senility. And quite often even dementia. She paused to take a breath. One legend claims that a certain harpy huntress was still fighting fit at the age of 60. Some even say she was active into her 90s. But that is just a legend, the Duke commented. He poured himself a drink from a small flask he had resting on the table. What about other male children? Harpies tend to have more female than male children anyway. For every 10 or so females, only 1 male child is born. If a village already has a chief and they don't need or want an heir, then the child will usually be killed by whatever means they happen to have on hand. Do they eat their children? The Duke asked, sipping his drink. Harpies are carnivores. They will eat the flesh of any other creature, including humans, goblins, elves, or whatever else they might find. However, it is not believed that they are cannibals. Good, the Duke commented. That will do for tonight. Father, Jenni's demeanour changed a little now they were finished with the lesson. Just why are we talking about harpies again so soon? The Duke hesitated to answer. He decided that Jenni would find out tomorrow anyway. A small harpy village has crossed into our lands. Tomorrow, I plan to take the army and remove them. Our chat was as much to remind myself as to what they were, as much as it was to educate you. Can I come? Jenni asked. This is war, Jenni dear, the Duke responded. But Daddy, Jenni protested, I'm 10 years old. You let both of my brothers go to war with you when they were my age. Is it because I'm a girl? I let Greyforth come with me merely to watch when he was 14. It was true that Tyr came along as well, and it is also true that he was only 10 at the time. However, I didn't know he was with us until we actually saw the enemy. You see, Greyforth had helped smuggle him along. He didn't have my blessing to be there. They'll be with you tomorrow, though. With your blessing, Jenni commented. Greyforth is now a knight of the realm. He is 20 years of age. Of course he'll be with me tomorrow. And though Tyr hasn't been officially knighted yet, I plan to give him command of the reserve forces. It would be good for him to gain some experience of command. And as nasty as harpies might get in battle, I don't expect to have to call on him for aid, the Duke explained. So I'd be safe if I stayed with Tyr, Jenni pleaded. The Duke sighed. He could look the king straight in the eye and argue the 10th degree of the merest subtext of a declaration, yet he found it virtually impossible to refuse his own daughter anything. Very well, you may come. You may join the reserves in the capacity of an observer only. If I do call upon the reserves, you will not join them in battle. Is that clear?" "It's clear, father," Jenni replied. "Good," the Duke said. "Make sure it is. If you disobey me in this, I'll never take you to war with me again." "I'll be good, father," Jenni replied. She got up from her chair and made her way round his desk. She kissed him on the cheek. "Thank you, father. I can't wait to tell Tia. I think we're done here for the night. I'm proud of your progress. I think you should get an early night if you want to be up to join the war party," the Duke told her. Like most children of her age, Jenni was quite resistant to the idea of going to bed. Today, however, instead of insisting that her father allow her to stay awake a little longer, she was clearly so excited about being allowed to go to war the next day that she gave no resistance at all. Jenni walked over to the bookcase where she returned the volume she had borrowed. Then she headed to the door, turning before opening it to wave and say, "Good night, Daddy." "Good night, Jenni," the Duke said, echoing the wave. Then he suddenly had a thought. "Oh, Jenni, hold on a second." "Yes, father?" Jenni said questioningly. She hovered by the door. "It might be best if you didn't tell Mother about our little conversation," he suggested. "She might be resistant to the idea." "Okay, Daddy," she readily agreed, and opening the door, she left him alone in the study. The Duke sat back at his desk and sighed. He still had a lot to do before he too went to bed. He had to go and double-check that Sir Grant was preparing the troops for tomorrow's battle. He needed to make sure that the archers had plenty of arrows, in case the Harpies took to the air. He had to talk with his officers and his sons to tell them where he was going to want them during the battle. He also had to put on his armour and make sure that it still fitted him. He didn't have long to get it adjusted if it didn't. First, though, he should go and tell his wife. It wasn't something he wanted to do, as she would probably be up all night worrying. If he didn't tell her tonight, he'd never hear the end of it. He could understand why she would worry too. Even if the Harpies didn't hear the ducal army coming and didn't get the opportunity to attack from on high, he still expected nominal losses. Tia and Jenni ought to be safe with the reserves, but Greyforth would demand to be in the forefront of the action, and as a knight of the realm, it was his right to be there. With Greyforth's wife about to give birth any day now, the Duke would have preferred it if his son decided to stay home with her.